The courtroom fell silent as the door swung open. Every eye turned toward the entrance. A man in a dark suit walked forward, his boots clicking against the marble floor. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped a leather folder. This was David Brennan. For 12 years, he had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace. He had stood in hallways where kings walked. He had witnessed moments the world would never see. And now, he was about to reveal a secret that could destroy the monarchy itself. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, you understand the gravity of your testimony today?" David nodded. His throat felt dry. "I do, Your Honor." Across the room, Queen Camilla sat perfectly still. Her expression was calm, controlled, but her fingers dug into the armrest of her chair. Beside her, her lawyer whispered something. She did not respond. She simply stared at David, her gaze sharp as a blade. King Charles was not in the courtroom. He had not been seen in public for 3 weeks. The official statement said he was recovering from a minor illness. But rumors swirled like smoke through London. Some said he was in hiding. Others whispered something far darker. David took his seat in the witness box. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Margaret Hale, approached him slowly. She held a tablet in her hand. On it was a photograph. She turned it toward the jury. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber, "can you tell us what you witnessed on the night of October 14th? David closed his eyes for a moment. He could still hear it. The crash, the shouting, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. "I was stationed outside the king's private study," he began. It was late, around 11 at night. Most of the staff had gone home. The palace was quiet. Margaret nodded. "And then I heard voices," David said. "Raised voices. At first I thought it was just a disagreement. The king and queen sometimes argued. It wasn't unusual, but this time was different." David's jaw tightened. Yes, this time was different. He paused. The courtroom held its breath. I heard the queen scream, not in fear, in rage. Then I heard a crash, glass breaking. And then he swallowed hard. I heard the king cry out in pain. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge banged his gavel once. Silence returned. Margaret stepped closer. "What did you do?" "I opened the door," David said. "I had to. It's my duty to protect the king." "And what did you see?" David looked directly at Camilla. She did not blink. She did not move. "I saw the king on the floor," he said quietly. Blood on his forehead, a broken vase beside him. "And I saw the queen standing over him, her hand still raised." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras flashed despite the no photography rule. The judge slammed his gavel again and again. If you're watching this story unfold and want to hear what happens next, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss how this trial ends. Camilla's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. This is pure speculation and overruled," the judge said coldly. "The witness will continue." Margaret turned back to David. "Mr. Brennan, did the queen say anything in that moment?" David's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes," she looked at me. "And she said he had it coming." The words hung in the air like poison. Camilla's face remained frozen, but deep in her eyes, something flickered. Was it fear? Defiance? Or something else entirely? Margaret walked back to her table and picked up another document. She held it high.
"Your Honor?"
"I have additional evidence. Security footage, audio recordings, and a medical report from the king himself." The judge gestured for her to continue. Margaret pressed a button. A screen descended from the ceiling. The lights dimmed, and on that screen a video began to play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. A hallway camera. Timestamp, October 14th, 10:47 p.m. The king walked into view. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped. He pushed open the door to his study and disappeared inside. 3 minutes later, Camilla appeared. She moved quickly, her heels clicking on the stone floor. Her jaw was set. Her hands were clenched into fists. She entered the study and slammed the door behind her. The video had no sound. But everyone in the courtroom could imagine the words being exchanged then. At 11:02 p.m., the study door burst open. David Brennan rushed inside. The camera angle shifted automatically, focusing on the doorway. And there, just barely visible through the gap, was King Charles. On the floor, his hand pressed to his head, blood seeping between his fingers. The video ended. The courtroom was silent. Not a single person moved. Margaret turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just saw is not in dispute. The defense has confirmed the authenticity of this footage. What we are here to determine is intent. Was this an accident? Or was it an attack?" She turned back to David. "Mr. Brennan, when you entered the room, did the Queen attempt to help the King?" David shook his head slowly. "No. She just stood there, staring at him. Did she seem shocked? Regretful?" "No," David said. "She seemed satisfied." Another wave of whispers spread through the room. Camilla's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Julian Cross, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is character assassination. My client is being painted as a monster based on one man's interpretation of her expression." The judge looked at Margaret. "Counselor, do you have more concrete evidence?" Margaret smiled thinly. "I do, Your Honor." She pulled out a small audio device and placed it on the evidence table. "This recording was made by Palace Security, standard protocol for all rooms in the royal residence. It captures the conversation that took place in the King's study that night." Julian's face went pale. "Your Honor, my client was not informed that such recordings existed." "This is a violation of your client lives in a palace with state security," the judge interrupted. "Recordings are standard." Objection denied. Margaret pressed play. At first there was only static, then a voice. "King Charles." Calm but firm. "I've made my decision, Camilla. The announcement will be made next week." Another voice. Camilla's, sharp and cold. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you, for this family?" "It's not about you," Charles said quietly. "It's about what's right for the country." "What's right?" Camilla's voice rose. "You mean what William wants? What that boy has been whispering in your ear for months. This has nothing to do with William." "Liar." The word was a shout. Then came the sound of something crashing. "You're going to humiliate me. Strip away everything I've worked for. Do you think I'll just stand by and let that happen?" "Camilla, please, no. You don't get to do this." There was a scuffle, a grunt of pain, then silence. The recording ended. The courtroom was frozen. Every person sat rigid in their seat, trying to process what they had just heard. Margaret turned to the jury. The King intended to make an announcement that, according to sources close to the palace, would have significantly altered Queen Camilla's role within the monarchy. Some say he planned to request a formal separation. Others believe he intended to remove her title entirely. Julian shot to his feet. "Speculation." "Your Honor, I have the draft speech," Margaret said calmly. She held up a document, written in the King's own hand, "Submitted as evidence this morning." The judge gestured. "Approach." Both lawyers walked to the bench. The judge read the document in silence. His expression darkened. He looked at Camilla, then at the jury. "This document will be entered into evidence. The jury will be provided copies." Julian returned to his seat, his face ashen. Camilla leaned toward him and whispered urgently. He shook his head. Margaret addressed David again. "Mr. Brennan, after you entered the room, what happened?" "I called for help," David said. Medical staff arrived within minutes. The King was taken to a private treatment room. I stayed behind to secure the scene and the Queen. She left. She walked past me without a word and went to her chambers. "Did she visit the King later that night?" David hesitated. "No, she didn't see him for 3 days." A gasp rose from the gallery. Margaret let the moment settle. Then she asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Mr. Brennan, in your professional opinion, was this an accident?" David looked at Camilla one last time. Her eyes were cold steel. "No," he said firmly. "It was not an accident." The defense's turn came after lunch. The courtroom felt different now, heavier, the air thick with tension. Julian Cross stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and approached David Brennan with measured steps. His expression was calm, but his eyes were calculating. "Mr. Brennan," he began smoothly, "you've served the royal family for 12 years. Is that correct?" "Yes," David said. "And in those 12 years, have you ever witnessed any physical altercation between the king and queen before this night?" David paused. No, Julian repeated, nodding. "So this was, by your own admission, completely out of character for Queen Camilla." "I didn't say that. But you just confirmed you'd never seen her act violently before." David's jaw tightened. "I've seen her angry. I've heard things." "Heard things?" Julian said with a small smile. "Rumors, gossip, or actual evidence?" "Action," Margaret called. "Badgering the witness." "Sustained," the judge said. "Move on, Mr. Cross." Julian clasped his hands behind his back. "Mr. Brennan, when you entered the study, you said the king was on the floor. You said there was blood. You said you saw a broken vase. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Did you see the queen holding that vase?" David hesitated. "No, but did you see her throw it?" "No, but I heard please answer only the question asked," Julian said firmly. "Did you, with your own eyes, see Queen Camilla strike the king or throw any object at him?" The silence stretched long. David finally admitted. Julian turned to the jury. "So everything you concluded that this was an attack, that it was intentionally based entirely on assumption. On your interpretation of events." "It's based on what I saw and heard," David said, his voice rising. "The king was injured. She was standing over him. She said he deserved it." "Or," Julian said calmly, "perhaps the king tripped. Perhaps he fell and struck his head on the table. Perhaps the vase was knocked over in the chaos. Perhaps the queen's words were spoken in shock and anger, not admission." "That's not what happened," David said through gritted teeth. "But you can't prove it, can you?" Julian pressed. "You didn't see the moment of impact. You didn't see the queen touch him. All you saw was the aftermath." David's hands gripped the edge of the witness box. "I know what I heard. I know what I saw in her eyes." Julian walked back to his table and picked up a folder. "Mr. Brennan, are you aware that 3 months ago you applied for a transfer to a different royal residence?" David's face went pale. "That has nothing to do with, and that your request was denied by the queen herself?" A murmur spread through the gallery. "That's irrelevant," David said quickly. Julian opened the folder. "According to palace records, you had several disagreements with Queen Camilla regarding security protocols. She felt you were overstepping your authority. You felt she was interfering with your duties. Is that accurate?" David said nothing. "Mr. Brennan, is it possible that your testimony here today is colored by personal resentment toward the queen?" "No," David said, but his voice wavered. Julian smiled slightly. "No further questions." David stepped down from the witness box. His face was flushed. He wouldn't look at anyone as he left the courtroom. Margaret called her next witness, Dr. Evelyn Hart, the royal physician. She was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed. She took the stand with quiet authority. "Dr. Hart," Margaret began, "you treated King Charles on the night of October 14th. Can you describe his injuries?" "He had a laceration on his forehead," Dr. Hart said, "approximately 3 inches long. It required 8 stitches. He also had bruising on his left temple and a mild concussion. In your medical opinion, could these injuries have been caused by a simple fall?" Dr. Hart hesitated. "It's possible, but unlikely." "Why unlikely?" "Angle of the laceration suggests impact from a thrown or swung object, not a fall. If he had simply tripped, I would expect to see different patterns of bruising, more diffuse. This was concentrated, forceful." Margaret nodded. "Did the king tell you what happened?" Dr. Hart's expression tightened. "He said he didn't remember clearly, that everything happened very fast." "Did he seem afraid?" Julian stood. "Objection. Speculation. I'm asking for the doctor's observation," Margaret said. The judge considered. "I'll allow it." "Dr. Hart, please answer based only on what you directly observed." Dr. Hart took a breath. "The king seemed anxious. He asked me several times if anyone else knew about his injuries. He made me promise not to discuss them with anyone outside the medical staff. Did that strike you as unusual?" "Very, doctor." Hart said, The king is normally quite transparent about his health, but that night he seemed desperate to keep the incident quiet. Margaret walked closer. "Did you see Queen Camilla that night?" "Yes. She came to the medical wing around 3 in the morning. 3 days after the incident. You said she didn't see him." "She didn't enter his room," Dr. Hart clarified. "She stood outside the door. I saw her through the window. She stayed there for perhaps 2 minutes, then she left." "Did she appear concerned? Set, doctor?" Hart's voice was quiet. "She appeared conflicted." The word hung in the air. Conflicted. Not guilty. Not remorseful. Conflicted. Margaret thanked her and sat down. Julian stood for cross-examination. But before he could speak, the courtroom doors opened. A guard entered, walking quickly to the judge. He handed him a note. The judge read it. His face went pale. He looked up at the courtroom. "We're taking a recess. Court will resume in 1 hour." He stood and left quickly. Too quickly, the journalists erupted into chaos. Margaret looked confused. Julian frowned deeply, and Camilla, for the first time since the trial began, smiled. The hour felt like a lifetime. Reporters crowded in the hallways, shouting questions that no one would answer. Security guards stood rigid at every door. Something had changed. Something big. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. The judge returned to his seat, his expression grim. He didn't look at anyone as he shuffled his papers. "Before we continue," he said, his voice strained, "I have an announcement. His Majesty King Charles has requested to provide testimony." The courtroom exploded. Shouts, gasps, camera flashes despite the rules. Margaret looked stunned. Even Julian seemed caught off guard. He leaned over and whispered urgently to Camilla. She shook her head once, sharply. "Order." The judge shouted, slamming his gavel. "The king will testify via video link due to his health." This testimony was not anticipated, but as the alleged victim, he has the right to speak. A large screen was wheeled into the courtroom. Technicians worked quickly to set it up. The lights dimmed slightly. And then King Charles appeared on the screen. He looked older than anyone remembered. His face was drawn, pale. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He wore a simple sweater, not his usual formal attire. He sat in a room that looked like a private study, wooden shelves and paintings behind him. "Your Majesty," the judge said carefully, "thank you for joining us. Are you comfortable to proceed?" Charles nodded slowly. "I am." Margaret stood. Her voice was gentle, respectful. "Your Majesty, can you tell us what happened on the night of October 14th? Charles closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they glistened with unshed tears. "I had made a decision," he began quietly. "A decision about the future of the monarchy. About my role. About—" He paused. "About my marriage." The courtroom held its breath. "I had consulted with advisors, with my sons, with members of Parliament. I had come to realize that the pressures of the crown, expectations placed upon Camilla and myself, had created a situation that was no longer sustainable." "What decision did you make?" Margaret asked softly. "I decided to step back from certain public duties, to allow my son William to take on more responsibility. And I decided that Camilla and I needed time apart. Not a divorce. Not immediately, but a separation. A chance for both of us to find peace." Camilla's face remained expressionless, but her hands trembled slightly. "You told the Queen this on October 14th?" Margaret asked, as Charles said. "I told her that evening. I tried to explain that it wasn't about blame, that we had both struggled, but she," his voice broke, "she didn't take it well." "What happened then?" Charles looked directly at the camera. At Camilla, though she was not on his screen, she was furious. She said I was betraying her, that I was weak, that I was letting others control me. I tried to calm her down, but she became more and more agitated. She picked up a vase from my desk, a crystal vase, and she threw it. The courtroom was deathly silent. "Did she throw it at you?" Margaret asked. Charles hesitated. "I don't know. It happened so fast. It might have been aimed at the wall. Or at me. I turned my head, and it struck me here. He touched his forehead. I fell. I remember hitting the floor. I remember the pain. And I remember Camilla standing over me, saying things I wish I could forget. What did she say, Your Majesty? Charles looked down at his hands. She said I had ruined her life, that I had promised her a crown and then tried to take it away. She said I deserved what happened. Margaret let the words settle. Then she asked, Do you believe the Queen intended to harm you? The question hung like a sword. Charles looked up. His eyes were wet. I don't know, he whispered. I want to believe it was an accident. That she lost control for a moment. But I can't forget the look in her eyes. I can't forget the hatred I saw there. Julian stood abruptly. Your Majesty, with respect, you've admitted you're not certain the vase was thrown at you. You've admitted the Queen may have been aiming for the wall. How can this court determine intent based on such uncertainty? Charles looked at Julian. Because I know my wife, he said quietly. I know what she's capable of when she feels threatened. And I know that in that moment, she wanted to hurt me. The words struck like a lightning bolt. Julian pressed on. Your Majesty, forgive me. But you're currently separated from the Queen. You're in the process of potentially dissolving your marriage. Could it be that your perception of that night is influenced by the difficulties in your relationship? Charles's jaw tightened. I am trying to be fair. I am trying to see both sides. But I cannot lie about what I experienced. Margaret stepped forward. Your Majesty, are you afraid of the Queen? The question was a dagger. Charles stared at the camera for a long moment. The silence stretched. Every person in that courtroom waited. Finally, he spoke. Yes, he said. Yes, I am. The courtroom erupted again. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Reporters shouted. Guards moved to maintain order. Camilla stood abruptly. This is a lie, she shouted, her composure finally breaking. He's lying to protect himself, to justify abandoning his responsibilities. Julian grabbed her arm. Your Majesty, please, he's weak. Camilla shouted, pointing at the screen. He's always been weak. And now, he's trying to paint me as a monster, because he can't face his own failures. The judge slammed his gavel one final time. Queen Camilla, you will sit down, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Camilla stared at the judge. Her chest heaved. Her face was flushed with rage. But slowly, she sat. On the screen, King Charles looked utterly broken. Margaret turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have one more question for His Majesty. The judge nodded. Margaret faced the screen. Your Majesty, if this court finds the Queen guilty of assault, what do you believe should happen to her? Charles closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. I don't know, he whispered. I honestly don't know. The screen went dark. King Charles was gone, but his words still echoed through the courtroom. The weight of them pressed down on everyone present. The judge called for a 30-minute recess. People filed out slowly, stunned into silence. In the hallway, no one spoke above a whisper. The trial had stopped being about evidence. It had become something far more painful. A public dissection of a broken marriage. A king forced to confess his fear of his own wife. When court resumed, it was the defense's turn. Julian Cross had to rebuild everything. He stood and straightened his tie. His face was composed, but tension radiated from him. Your Honor, he said, I would like to call Queen Camilla to the stand. A murmur rippled through the room. This was unexpected. Defendants rarely testified in their own trials. Too risky. Too unpredictable, but Camilla stood without hesitation. She walked to the witness box with her head high, her spine straight. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Julian approached her carefully. Your Majesty, thank you for your willingness to speak today. I know this has been extraordinarily difficult. Camilla nodded once. Her eyes were cold and clear. Can you tell the court what happened on the night of October 14th? Camilla took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was steady. My husband told me he wanted a separation. After all the years I had devoted to him, to the crown, to this country. He told me he was casting me aside. How did that make you feel? How do you think it made me feel? Camilla's voice sharpened. Betrayed. Humiliated. Furious. I gave up my entire life for him. My reputation. My privacy. My dignity. And he repaid me with abandonment. Julian nodded sympathetically. And the vase? The one that struck the king? Camilla looked directly at the jury. I was angry. I picked up the vase. But I didn't throw it at Charles. I threw it at the wall behind him. I wanted to break something. To release the rage I felt. It was childish. It was wrong. But it was not an attempt to harm him. Did you know the vase had struck him? Not immediately, Camilla said. I was looking away. I heard him fall, and when I turned, he was on the floor. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. The guard testified that you said he had it coming. Can you explain that? Camilla's eyes flashed. I was in shock. I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have. But I didn't mean he deserved to be hurt. I meant he deserved to face the consequences of his decision. To understand the pain he was causing. Julian walked closer. Your Majesty, did you intend to harm the king? No, Camilla said firmly. Absolutely not. Do you regret what happened? For the first time, Camilla's composure cracked. Her voice softened. Every day, every single day, I wish I had controlled myself. I wish I had been stronger. But I am not a monster. I am a woman who was pushed to her breaking point.
Ow!
Julian turned to the judge. No further questions. Margaret rose for cross-examination. She moved slowly, her eyes never leaving Camilla.
Your Majesty,
She began. You say you threw the vase at the wall. But the medical evidence suggests the angle of impact is inconsistent with that claim. The injury pattern suggests a direct throw, not a ricochet.
right.
Camilla's jaw tightened. I'm telling you what happened. You're telling us your version, Margaret corrected. But let's talk about the recording. The conversation that was captured. You said the king was letting others control him. You said he was weak. You accused him of betraying you. Those don't sound like the words of someone who simply wanted space to process her emotions. I was angry, Camilla said coldly. You were enraged, Margaret countered. And in that rage you picked up a heavy crystal vase and threw it. Whether you aimed for the wall or for the king, the result was the same. He was injured. And you stood over him, unrepentant. I was in shock. Were you? Margaret stepped closer. Because according to Dr. Hart, you didn't check on your husband for 3 days. You didn't call for help? The guard did. You simply walked away. Camilla's face flushed. I was told he was being cared for. I was told he was stable, but you didn't visit him. You didn't apologize. You didn't even ask how he was. Our marriage was falling apart, Camilla snapped. I wasn't thinking clearly. Margaret paused. Then she asked the question that had been building throughout the entire trial. Your Majesty, do you love the king? The courtroom went silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Camilla stared at Margaret. Her expression was unreadable. I love the man I married, she said finally. But that man is gone, so you don't love him anymore? Camilla's eyes hardened. I don't know what I feel anymore. Our relationship has been destroyed by pressure, by expectation, by constant scrutiny. Love doesn't survive that. And yet, Margaret said quietly, you still fight to keep your title, your position, your place beside him. Because I earned it, Camilla said, her voice rising. Because I sacrificed everything for it, and I will not let it be taken from me. Margaret turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the Queen admit that she no longer loves the king. You've heard her admit that she values her title above all else. And you've heard her describe her rage, her sense of betrayal, her desperation to hold on to power. She turned back to Camilla. Your Majesty, I believe that on the night of October 14th, you didn't lose control. I believe you made a choice. A choice to punish the king for daring to take away what you believe is rightfully yours. That's not true, Camilla said, but her voice wavered. You threw that vase at him, not at the wall, at him. And when he fell, you felt satisfied. Because in that moment, he understood your pain, Camilla whispered. And now in this courtroom, you're still fighting. Not for love, not for forgiveness, but for power? No. Camilla shouted, "You don't understand. None of you understand what it's like to live under that kind of pressure. To be hated by an entire country, to be blamed for everything?" Her voice broke. Tears streamed down her face. "I did my best. I tried to be what they wanted, but it was never enough. I was never enough." The courtroom was silent. Camilla covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Margaret stepped back. No further questions. The trial entered its final day. The closing arguments were brief. Both sides had said everything they could. Now it was up to the jury. Margaret stood before them, her voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about whether Queen Camilla is a good person or a bad person. It's not about whether she deserves sympathy for the pressures she faced. It's about one simple question. Did she commit assault?" She paused, looking at each juror in turn. "The evidence is clear. The king was injured. The queen threw the object that caused the injury. Whether she aimed for the wall or for him, whether she intended severe harm or simply wanted to frighten him, the law is clear. An act of violence occurred, and the queen is responsible." She sat down. Julian stood. His voice was measured, thoughtful. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client made a mistake. She acted out of emotion, out of pain, out of desperation. But making a mistake is not the same as committing a crime. If every person who lost their temper in a moment of anguish was guilty of assault, our prisons would overflow." He walked closer to the jury. "Consider the context. A marriage in crisis. A woman who devoted her life to a role she never asked for. A moment of rage that spiraled out of control. Yes, the king was hurt. Yes, it should never have happened. But intent matters. And the prosecution has not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Queen Camilla intended to harm her husband." He returned to his seat. "I ask you to consider mercy, to consider the full picture, and to recognize that sometimes good people do terrible things for understandable reasons." The jury was dismissed to deliberate. Hours passed. Then a day. Then 2 days. The world watched and waited. News channels ran constant coverage. Experts debated. Social media exploded with opinions. Some supported Camilla, calling her a victim of an impossible situation. Others demanded justice, calling her dangerous and unfit for the crown. On the third day, the jury returned. The courtroom filled quickly. Camilla sat at the defense table, her face pale but composed. Across the room, Margaret waited in silence. The judge entered and took his seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The jury foreman stood. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serious expression. "We have, Your Honor." "How do you find the defendant, Queen Camilla, on the charge of assault?" The silence was absolute. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. "We find the defendant." The foreman paused. "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Shouts, gasps, reporters scrambling for their phones. Guards moved quickly to maintain order. Camilla closed her eyes. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply sat there, frozen. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! I will have order." Slowly, the noise subsided. The judge looked at Camilla. "Queen Camilla, you have been found guilty of assault. Given the unique circumstances of this case, the complex dynamics at play, and the lack of prior criminal history, I am sentencing you to 2 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order prohibiting you from approaching King Charles without his explicit consent." He paused. "Additionally, while I cannot strip you of your title that is a matter for Parliament and the Crown, I strongly recommend that you voluntarily step back from all public royal duties until such time as both you and His Majesty have had the opportunity to heal." Camilla finally opened her eyes. She looked at the judge. Then she nodded once, slowly. "This court is adjourned," the judge said. The gavel came down one final time. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaos. Protesters on both sides shouted slogans. Police formed barriers to keep them apart. Cameras flashed as Camilla's car pulled away, her face barely visible behind tinted windows. Across London, in a private residence, King Charles watched the news alone. His face was drawn, exhausted. When the verdict was announced, he closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. "It's over," he whispered to himself. But it wasn't. Not really. In the days that followed, Camilla released a statement. It was brief, dignified. She apologized to the king. She apologized to the country. She acknowledged her mistakes and vowed to seek help. Charles responded with his own statement. He thanked the court. He expressed his hope that both he and Camilla could find peace. And he confirmed that they would remain separated for the foreseeable future. Parliament debated whether to strip Camilla of her title. The vote was close. In the end, they decided to leave it in place, but with strict conditions. She would retain the title of Queen Consort, but she would have no official duties. No public appearances. No involvement in royal affairs. She was, for all intents and purposes, queen in name only. Months passed. The story faded from the headlines. The world moved on to other scandals, other dramas. But for those who had watched the trial, the image remained. A king, broken and afraid, testifying against his own wife. A queen, proud and defiant, fighting to hold on to power even as her marriage crumbled. And a courtroom full of people who witnessed the truth, that even crowns cannot protect you from the pain of a broken heart. David Brennan, the guard who had revealed the secret, left the royal service. He moved to a quiet town in Scotland and rarely spoke about the trial. When journalists called, he politely declined to comment. Dr. Hart continued her work at the palace, treating the king and his family with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown. And King Charles slowly began to rebuild his life. He spent more time with his sons. He took on causes that mattered to him. He learned to live without the woman he had once loved. But late at night, when the palace was quiet, he sometimes stood at his window and looked out at the city. And he wondered if things could have been different. If they could have found a way through the darkness together, he would never know. The trial had revealed the truth, but it had also destroyed what little remained of the life they had built. And in the end, that was the real tragedy. Not the assault, not the verdict, but the fact that two people who had once stood together before a nation, promising to love and honor each other, had become strangers, bound by a crown, separated by pain, and forever marked by the night everything shattered. The story ended not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a quiet, aching sadness. The kind of sadness that comes when love dies, not in a single moment, but slowly. Over years of pressure and resentment and unspoken hurt, the kind of sadness that no verdict could ever heal.